I am number one, not number two. If I'm not the one, I'm uncomfortable. See the competition I've been running through. Leveled up, I only see him in my rear view.
Welcome everybody to another Happy Rabbit podcast.
What's up, guys?
Today we have a guest that Dakota brought into us.
I did. I found this guy off the street, and I was like, he seems pretty interesting. Let's bring him on. Talk
We
some
find
films.
a lot of people on the street.
Find a lot of people on the street these days. No, this is my buddy Torben. Yeah, dude, Torben's a super talented editor. He's been doing it, 10, 20 years now? He's been cutting a long time. And yeah, he taught one of my editing classes at UVU. So that's how I got to know him, and we connected instantly. It's kind of a funny story because, ever since my freshman year at UVU, I'd heard people say how hard this editing 2 class is and how much they're like, oh, study up for it, man. It's going to kick you in the butt. So I was literally so nervous for it this entire time. And no cap, the professor we had for that class was definitely part of the reason why people were nervous for that class. And so, my entire time building up to that last class, I was like, oh, man, it's going to suck. And then I find out on the first day that we don't have that professor. We have Torben instead. And he's filling in. So he made that class literally like a dream come true. So totally saved my butt. So I've been a big fan of Torben ever since. So welcome on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
What do you want to know?
Ooh, I want to start with, I like starting at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the first thing you worked on in film school?
So I never went to film school.
Okay.
I studied philosophy and communication and humanities. It was like a blended degree. And my final project for my degree was a film. So
Okay.
it was called The Sonosopher. It was about one of my professors at UVU named Alex Caldiero. He still teaches there. And it was our first movie. We'd never really picked up cameras. We'd never edited before. We'd never really done much of anything, and just had this idea that we wanted to make it. And so borrowed cameras. We borrowed a DVX from the communication department that had a broken broken servo that we were just so there's no depth in any of the movie because we're when we're this close to him, we're actually that close to him because we weren't ever zooming in. We were just doing it. Learned a lot of lessons that way. Learned how to raise money. Got our first grants, got our first support, and it became a big thing enough to where we did we had our first we did a sold out screening at UVU, and then we did another one at Salt Lake City Library. We did Radio West. We did we were in all the publications locally, and then we got into CineQuest Film Festival in San Jose. So that was our first one, and it was an experimental documentary. It's super wild. Yeah. So that's how I got started. I was always interested in movies from the time I was really little. I grew up in a movie family, in the way that I can name actors and movies. My dad can do with black and white films.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And I grew up where that was big movie watching culture in my family. But yeah, I started off as an anthropology student, and I turned to my wife at the time, who was a film student at BYU, and was like, would you mind if I became a filmmaker too? Because it's I'm interested in this. And then I just jumped in and
That's awesome.
learned. So most of the things I've learned from making mistakes and kicking myself, and then doing something different the next time, making a new mistake.
Sounds like us.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, if I was in film
the best
school,
way.
right? I was gonna say, if I was in film school and I heard that the philosophy students were making movies and getting into film festivals and stuff, I'd be pissed. But it's nice that you had a formal written signature from your wife. It's yes, you may filmmake. That is fine. You have the stamp of approval.
Yeah.
So I guess everyone else can back off.
Yeah,
I would have been upset though.
I just didn't want to encroach on her. It was, it was her thing, and I was like, and then I did, and then when I did encroach, that's how I am. Then I was
You're in.
Mr. filmmaking guy. Yeah.
Heck yeah. Heck yeah.
That's awesome.
I guess what is it that really, because I feel very much the same way. I was always really attracted to movies growing up. I had huge family culture built around movies.
Mm-hmm.
When did you see a turning point for yourself that movies weren't necessarily just something to enjoy or something to watch with the family, but they actually became an influential part of your life?
I watched Breathless for the first time, for example, when I was 15 or something like that.
Oh,
14.
wow. Yeah.
My sister put me up on it. What really got me into movies were mafia movies.
Sick.
Loved mafia movies. Wanted to be in the mafia. Wanted to be Italian. Was just really, was really into it. But I I didn't know I wanted to be a filmmaker though until I was in my 20s. I came back from I was a missionary in Thailand, and I came back thinking I was going to be a therapist.
Interesting.
And I started off on that route, started doing psychology, but I just always end up going back to creative stuff because I grew up I was in a hip hop group for a decade. I was in, I've always done creative stuff. I was always much better at like finishing creative things than finishing homework assignments generally.
Yeah.
Okay, real quick, what was the hip hop group called?
Mental Elastic Dynasty. It was we were based in Michigan, Detroit. We were signed to a Detroit label called Mob North Records.
That's awesome, man.
So I even rejoined in like 2016, performed at South by Southwest, did some big shows. Yeah.
Dang, dude, that's
sick.
dope.
Yeah.
I feel like at one point during the semester we like walked into class and you were playing like your music.
Yeah.
And I was like, Torben, is this you? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, bro, you have bars.
Yeah, it's one of the best parts of being a professor. I can play. I played a bunch of my movies too. It's like,
Yeah, it's like,
you have to be
sick,
here.
man. It's sick.
That's cool.
You're held hostage. You're my little audience now.
Yeah.
We had a good time with it.
But yeah, I would say from a pretty early age I was like knew there was more to movies than just entertainment. I was like, oh yeah, this is. But I took my first film class in high school. I failed it. When I was growing up, they had what they called EFE and EFA, Education for Employment, Education for the Arts. They were like different programs, and they would shuttle you to different schools in the area. And I just could never make the bus in the morning.
Was that in Michigan or is that?
This is in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah. So I ended up failing my first film class, and then I really didn't do anything with it again in any kind of serious way until I was at school. So I was
So how did you end up at UVU from Michigan?
So I moved out to Utah when I was 18. But between then I lived in Louisiana, and I moved from like a big school in Michigan to a school with like 1,000 people in Louisiana where the mascot was a rebel.
Yeah.
And like it was a huge cultural shift for me because I was like, I had always been obsessed with hip hop culture and black culture in general, and all of a sudden I was like, had people asking me if I was racist yet, and it was like it was a big.
You racist yet?
Yeah, I was like,
we'll come back next week.
Yeah. Check back. I don't think so, but
Wow.
yeah. So I had some family out here, and they offered me a job for like $15 an hour. And I thought, oh man, that's like, I was working at a Cajun restaurant at the time in Louisiana. And I thought, man, this is going to be great. So I moved out here. All that stuff fell through, but I ended up going on a Mormon mission like 9 months later, and then was in Thailand.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, it just kind of made sense to
Come back here.
come back to the area. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yep.
That's right. When were you at UVU?
I graduated in 2009.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
We might have overlapped there. I graduated in 2005.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I was there then.
Cool.
Yeah, we finished our movie I think in 2008 or 2009 maybe it was like, and
Very cool. Yeah. I know those DVXs that you speak of.
I use the same one.
Probably broke it.
You know, when it snapped off that Zoom.
It was a time at UVU where there was like a lot of documentaries being made actually, because there was This Divided State that was being made. I don't know if any of you've seen that. It's about when Michael Moore came to campus and they brought Sean Hannity as like a counter.
Oh
and all
yeah.
that
Okay.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then there was, so there was already like a whole culture where I was seeing where people were making documentaries about topics, you know. And as soon as I decided I wanted to make documentary, told a friend at night. Next day, I was working on my actual first documentary that I was I had like a 3-chip camera that I was just going out and like I'm shooting shitty footage, which I'm sure like none of it was used. And it was about Dick Cheney coming to BYU.
Oh, cool.
It was like called the BYU 25 or something. I can't remember. It was about how the BYU Democrats and all these like LDS kids were protesting against Cheney coming in.
Oh, I think I remember that happening. Yeah.
So I had I'd already been helping on that, and then I'd also been around like Alex, the professor that I made my first movie in, is featured pretty prominently in This Divided State.
Okay.
And that's why I ended up taking classes from him to begin with. So.
Cool.
There's already kind of a culture of people like picking up cameras and documenting stuff that was going on.
That's awesome.
So it sounds like right out of film school, you kind of hopped in like guerrilla style. You weren't
yeah.
necessarily as much like playing by the rules. You're like, give me that camera. I'm gonna do this myself. I'm gonna just
Everything,
Yeah.
everything from poster design to. I mean, we had great people to help us too, and that was another thing is that we were able to recruit. Like, we had something like 20 students working on it with us at one point. But the main thing, and we traveled to Italy and Sicily and New York and Philadelphia and all this kind of stuff with our like piecemeal equipment and made this movie. And yeah, it was just like I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday about like I feel like if we were both talking about how if people would encourage people to make and to like constantly be in the process instead of telling them what they're doing wrong when they're starting and getting in their head about like, oh, these are the rules and you have to do it that way, you have to do it that way. I think if you can teach somebody how to stick with the process itself will teach people so much that they need to learn. For example, when I was teaching the editing class, I hadn't read any of that stuff before because I didn't have a formal education.
Blink of an eye kind of thing.
Any of that kind of stuff. Yeah. And more often than not, the kind of things that were being taught were things that I'd learned independently, just from being devoted to the process and letting the process humble me, you know.
That's kind of how I felt when we started getting into like the lean forward moment.
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like this is a much more intuitive thing that you develop by cutting for years and years and years, as opposed to like a textbook definition of what exactly is the lean forward moment. It's like, I feel like it really depends on, you'll know when to cut when you've been cutting this long.
I think people learn, you learn the jargon of talking about story arc and lean forward moments and how do you like, how do you accentuate certain moments and all that kind of stuff. But I think the most interesting thing for me usually in people's creativity is how they idiosyncratically solve those problems, you know. Like, how do you look at that puzzle and fix it? And however you do that is most likely like what your voice is. And that's what's interesting. Like, if the camera is an extension of your eye, the edit is an extension of like your pace and cadence as a person and the way that you understand things and the kind of clarity that you have. To me, that's always going to be the strongest stuff, or the stuff that I'm going to like the most personally, because it reflects the maker the most.
Yeah.
I like that.
There's a lot of things that like fall into place. Like that's why that we always say like the best learning is doing, right?
Yeah.
Is because as you do it, like you watch your student films or whatever stuff that you're working on, and you watch it and you're like, man, we should do this better, or change this differently, you know, and you implement that in your next show, or you go back and re-edit whatever it is that you're doing, you know, and so you kind of learn all those things that you're like you say, like you're learning in class. You learn it as you go, and you might not necessarily know what the terms are or what you're doing, but because you watch shows or because it's part of like what you want to do, like you know what is good and what's bad, and so you naturally like just kind of do it.
And what's good and what's bad for you is like a taste that you develop by doing it, right? And the more that becomes defined. Like when I first started, I remember being in creative conversations and being really embarrassed that I didn't have an opinion. And like trying to conceal that I didn't really know how I felt about stuff. I was like, I don't know if it's good. It all feels kind of good to me, you know. And that's something that has just gotten more and more developed over time as I've had to solve puzzles in my own way. And I'm like, okay, no, I kind of like this, and I like for things to be that way, and so forth.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So tell us about some documentary, because we'll jump down that rabbit hole first.
Yeah, sure.
So that's kind of like a big part of what you do, right? Is documentary stuff.
Pretty much primarily. I mean, I've done other stuff for work.
Okay.
But like for me personally, all my projects I've directed have been documentaries other than one.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you primarily directing or shooting?
Direct, shoot, edit, color correct.
Cool.
Do all those. Yeah.
So documentary filmmaking is not like anything that I've done one documentary in my 20 plus career life, so it's like kind of a foreign entity for me because it's very different than scripted.
They don't bring trinities in
formats.
on documentaries,
they don't. It's super weird,
I think they should. I mean,
yeah
there's nothing more natural to the moment than the most expensive stabilizer on the world,
right?
Yeah.
So can you explain to us and maybe our film community like what it's like to film a documentary, or like how you get into that world, or just kind of break it down?
I think a lot of people get into it in a similar way, where unless they go to film school and they like start making their docs there, but I think a lot of people just decide that they're interested in a subject and they want to figure out how to turn it into a movie. I've done so many different topics. I did, so I started off with doing something on an experimental poet. since then, I've done docs on the disappearance of on a ghost town in southern Utah called Boomtown.
Oh yeah.
I did a movie called Trans Mormon about a family coming to terms in support of their transgender daughter.
Cool. That was not that long ago, right?
That was like 2015.
Yeah.
It went viral. It went viral in like
Yeah.
2015. That was my first one. I've had 2 docs go viral, but that was my first one. And it was
Cool. Yeah, that's rad.
it was, I had been making movies for years at that point, and we finished it. We did it in collaboration with Radio West, and 6 months the day after, we had like 1,000 views or something like that, or 2,000 views, and I just thought, like, this is the best. I've never had any of my stuff be viewed like this, And I'd had some success at film festivals, but I hadn't had any kind of views. And it sat online for about 6 months, and by 6 months, it had about 10,000 views, which was still the most I'd ever had.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it was then that Upworthy writer found it, and they posted it overnight. It went to 1 million.
Oh, crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Really changed the trajectory of it's really, that's when I started being able to be hired. And I thought what would happen is that people would hand me the keys, they'd be like, oh, you've demonstrated that you can do this, so here's the keys to the kingdom, make your next thing. And that's not what happened. But what did happen is that other people who wanted to make documentaries started hiring me.
Yeah.
Because they saw that I could
hand
do
you
it.
Steven Spielberg's phone number or something.
I wish. I did. I think a lot of people think that. I think, I'll get into. I think we still have a lot of mythological ways of looking at these things. I'll get into Sundance, and it's like outdated models that haven't actually existed for decades.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
And so you spend it's just like a big money suck. It takes in all the money, and everyone gets excited about it, and it basically plays on the same dreams of any kind of self-publishing structure does. And then the reality is, say that you do get in, or say that you do have a movie go viral or whatever it is, to me, I've always experienced success as a constellation of activities than any one linear one-to-one thing where it was oh, you did this, therefore I want to give you a platform. What I found is that people who are also looking for a platform will utilize you, and then that's how I've made a living, for the last 10 years, is editing on other people's stuff or working on my own things. But in terms of it being that kind of that one-to-one thing, hasn't really been my experience.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I've had a movie in Sundance. I shot a movie that played at Sundance called Quiet Heroes. That was in 2018, I think. There was a stretch of movies that I did from Trans Mormon on, because before Trans Mormon, I was doing I had already done Sonosifer. I had done Tarkio Bloom that played at Big Sky. I had done Boomtown that played won the jury award at St. Louis. It played at Big Sky also, and a bunch of other festivals. Scavenger that played at Mountain Film and Telluride, and a bunch of other places as well. I had 3 Utah Short Film of the Year awards that I got from the Utah Arts Festival, and I was doing 8-part modules on HIPAA, I was editing screenshots and PowerPoints, and I was still doing that. And it really wasn't until Trans Mormon that people were like, oh, this skill that's been used in this more experimental creative way could actually serve me, and I could hire this guy.
Wow. Can we talk about, is it Oxygen to Fly? Is that the name of that project? I remember you showed us that in class, and that blew me away. I loved that story. Everything to do with that. Can you tell us a little bit about that film?
Yeah, so I was brought in by a guy named Toffer Horman. He just passed actually last week. He had previously run the Utah Arts Festival's film festival for a bunch of years, and he got to know me that way. And so after Trans Mormon, although he was a big fan of Boomtown, so he saw things. He saw promise early on, and was like, "Oh yeah, you should, you guys do good work." So he had this idea. He worked for Children's Miracle Network, and his idea was to pair all these amazing miracle stories of different people that Children's Miracle Network had helped with individual documentary filmmakers. And he chose me because I had this hip hop background. It was a mixture between hip hop background and then the kind of family / gentle touch that Trans Mormon had.
Yeah.
And so he brought me on, and by the time I got brought on, he'd already found. So Isaiah is the main subject of this movie. It's a short. It's 5 minutes long. He was born without a jaw, and he also has a condition called situs inversus, where all of his like everything's mirrored image, everything's flipped, and he wants to be a rapper. He wanted to be a rapper, and so he was writing raps but couldn't actually voice in them himself. So Toffer found a rapper in Phoenix named Trap House, Tyke Patterson, who would voice Isaiah's rap. So we went there and we filmed Isaiah's story, and then we filmed the creation of this song, and then we released a song as a single. And that one, and then because I had a relationship with Upworthy from Trans Mormon, I was able to like feed it to them to begin with. And it was like 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and they like gave me edits to bring it down to 4.
Oh wow.
And yeah, that one went even crazier. We think that one's probably around like 100 million or so.
Oh my gosh.
I think I've seen that one. Yeah.
It's an incredible story. Imagine being like a really, really compelling lyricist.
Yeah.
You just have all these words floating around your head all day, and you don't have the means to actually get those out. Oh my gosh, that would be such a frustrating situation to put in. So literally, like that just seems like the key ingredients for like a really compelling narrative.
Yeah, and
like,
Isaiah's just great,
it.
and his family's amazing. He's basically like a celebrity now, you know.
Yeah.
He's like a checkmark Instagrammer.
Verified.
I've seen pictures with him and like 50 Cent, and pictures with him, Snoop. And all kinds of stuff.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I met Warren G with him one time
wow.
because we screened at we got invited to screen at South by Southwest as part of their social change panels. So yeah,
That's cool.
So it was a really cool project, and it was branded, right? Because I was brought on by a corporation, but we really fought the battle, and Toffer helped advocate for me and helped advocate to like not worry about impressions, not worry about putting in the name of Children's Miracle Network throughout. And we really worked hard to have it be the story of the creation of the song, Isaiah's story, and at the very end there's just one title card at the end that mentions Children's Miracle Network. And I think that was the way to do it.
Yeah.
That's such an
Definitely.
interesting thing to note, because have you seen really, really projects with great potential get ruined because brands are too
All the
pushy
time.
to get their names on top of it?
All the time. I'm sensitive to that stuff, so
Sure.
for me it might like what I might consider ruin, someone else might enjoy.
Sure.
But I just don't think that's the way. I think you invest somebody in a story, you really bring them into what the more meaningful thing is, and then you find a more elegant way to bring the brand into it. Personally, you know, depending on the type
Context
of thing, right?
and,
yeah.
But certainly on something like that, like
Yes.
we don't need to hear every minute that it was Children's Miracle Network that made it possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as
See
at
a
the
Children's
end,
Miracle Network box on the microphone kind of thing. I'm like, oh no.
I was, and we got a lot of pushback, honestly, at the time. But I was really happy to have like a producer who agreed with me and like fought for it. And
You saw your vision on it.
yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
Especially think nowadays with like people just crave like authenticity in the stuff they consume. I think we've gone through such a long phase of like retention editing or like Mr. Beast style editing where things are flashy and boom and bop and you don't even get 5 frames to tell what's going on before you're on to the next thing based on this assumption that people have like really short attention spans kind of thing. But I really feel like we've started to see that like fizzle out, and people crave that authenticity in their storytelling, and they want to feel like they're a part of something.
How many of us have been like deeply moved by something and be like, wow, like this is great, and then it ends up being a bank commercial, and you're like,
I've seen some of those recently, and I was like, dang.
Look at you, Sam McLaughlin, and those puppy commercials. I was like, oh man.
yeah.
No, yeah, I'm with you. The storytelling is a huge part of it, and I think I connect personally with the story way more than just flashy ads and stuff like that. I know I'll mute the flashy ads, but if there's something really cool and that I can physically and mentally be drawn into, I'm much more engaged to it and willing to then see what that company is after.
Right, 100%. And like,
Shows me they care.
yeah, right. It shows that they care. And like, I don't know, stories are gonna compel you to do something way more than a logo would, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, that was one of the biggest takeaways I had from your class. Is like beforehand, I had literally just thought of editing as like, okay, razor tool, got your track selection tool. Like I was thinking of it as ones and zeros and moving and code and computers and stuff. But you really took the time to explain to us that like editing is storytelling.
Yeah.
Like you have a script and you have your actual footage, and then you have a third version of this story that exists, and it's up to you to tell it. And that like completely changed the way I thought about editing altogether. It's not just an assembly of images; it's literally the telling of the story.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that's sick. I don't think enough people see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, you could take like a speech and hand it to 3 different people and get 3 different speeches, right? And a lot of that is like how that's like cadence and dynamics and contrast and the contrast and volume and when you slow down, when you know, whatever you do. And I think storytelling is the same way. Like interesting storytelling is always going to have dynamics and contrast, and a lot of that falls on the editor, especially in documentary, because you're more or less the writer too.
Yeah.
You know, at least on smaller projects. Like I've never worked on a project with it. Like that's not true. I've worked on projects where people helped write, but not where there was a full-time salaried writer writing it. So it was always like the director and directors and myself figuring
Kind
it
of
out and
piecing
like
it
figuring
together.
like and really looking at the parts. You know, you're like, okay, this is what you wanted. This is what you had like in your outline. This is what you got. And then it's always the same conversation. It's like, well, I wanted this motorcycle, and you're like, well, these are the parts we got. And then the person says, well, I still want that motorcycle. And then somewhere in that conversation, you get to something that approximates what they were looking for.
Like,
You
we
know,
took
based on the
tires from that
pieces.
motorcycle,
Totally.
put
Yeah.
them on a bike.
Yeah,
Like, okay.
yeah, because a lot of what you're doing as a documentary editor, especially, is you're mitigating the mistakes of production, which are always going to be because it's happening in real time. So like especially if you want like I was saying, you want a camera person, especially when you're doing like verite filming, you want somebody who has that eye where you can feel a person behind the camera like looking and actually like watching what's going on. But then say that you think the person is going to go right and they go left because you're taking those risks because you're actually like injecting yourself into it. But then you have a break in continuity and to figure it out. So it's a lot of like figuring out puzzles and making things feel like they happened in a certain way without with you knowing that you actually like did it with some duct tape and some like
Yeah.
Interesting. And that probably breaks down to like moment by moment stuff, like literally simple cuts, like, oh, she went in this door and came out this other door
all the time.
and then to like probably massive plot points, right? Like I remember you were saying in class that like the original Star Wars edit, right, there was no stakes set up for them. They were just like, hey, that Death Star looks bad, let's go blow it up. It wasn't until they edited in voiceover and cutaways, they're like, oh, that Death Star is gonna blow us up first. That means now we're justified, we're heroes, not terrorists.
Right.
Like the major plot point for that movie literally wasn't even baked in until the edit.
I think I showed like there's like a little short called how Star was saved in the edit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like I think that's I always find that stuff really inspiring and encouraging. It's like people who've been doing this for a long time, who have a lot of skills and they have millions and millions and millions of dollars. Don't know what they're doing still. You know? I mean, they do, but it's not like everything works to begin with.
It's not flawless.
Like, it's always like a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, a lot of honesty, a lot of rejection, pain, and discomfort, and all those kind of things to get to something that's serviceable that you're actually happy with. And it doesn't even need, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. That's just getting to something that like looks like a movie.
And an audience can maybe test screen and get some feedback for you.
Yeah.
Well, it's an art form, right? And so it's like, tell me one artist that sits back and was like, gosh, dang, I wish I could change that. You know what I mean? Like, there's not. I feel like everybody is. Doesn't matter if it's a painting or if it's tile or
The Mona
like
Lisa
whatever
smile
it
could
is.
go up a little more.
Right. An example like Van Gogh. Like he thought like his stuff was garbage, right?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
now look at it.
It's
you
true.
know. And so it's like I feel like film it's that same level where it's just like. You know, there's always something we feel like we can do better or change or fix or.
Yeah, I look at the process of making stuff like it's like the seasons, you know, like it's bigger, it's bigger than us. It's a stage that we're on, and then we kind of we make sense of the things on top of that stage, you know. So like during the pandemic, I remember early on in the pandemic, I had just noticed that my daffodils and my tulips all came up on time. I was like, oh, like. the earth like is not sitting around like or it's not rushing around and getting toilet paper and like and like trying to like make hand sanitizers from aloe vera and like
right
face masks off Amazon
and vodka. We had some vodka and some like aloe vera and stuff. Oh my god,
heck yeah.
So like, you know, like it's something that's bigger than you, and like the more you adapt to it, and you're like, oh, it's winter, so I need to wear warmer clothes, and I need to do this and do that. And I think the process will humble you and teach you in those same ways. It's like, it's a thing that if you're deeply immersed in, it will point you to the best versions of yourself, because it will stretch you to like, and especially if you're doing stuff that you're not always in control of.
Yeah.
Because then you're not defined by the parameters that you set for yourself, and like I think my favorite art is always like function of surprise, including the stuff I do. I'm like, oh, like that's when I remember why I do it and why I want to keep doing it, is when I surprise myself and something comes together. I'm like, oh, that is great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That came together. That's magical, and that's something that's greater than like the talent of the people that are involved in it. Like that helps, but a lot of it is like a constant reconciling with how difficult it is to make good stuff.
Yeah,
it's easier to do things technically competent, but to make things that have lasting power that aren't just like part of like a really quick, you know, like it used to be the news cycle, but I don't even know what you call it now, but like the YouTube cycle.
Yeah, I don't know. TikTok, it's candy. You eat it, you throw away the wrapper.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's cool.
Yeah.
Like that's another
Content.
way.
Content.
And that's a totally fine way to make a living too. Like I don't begrudge anyone whatever way they want to do this stuff, but for me, like I wanted to like make a great documentary. I still do. Yeah. You know, and so a lot of that is then being humbled by the form, because the form itself is a lot older than you. It's just like anything. Like same thing with painting. It's like paint, like people have been painting since the caves.
Yeah. Well said.
So there's a lot of people that have had to wrestle with that stuff, and you're not the first one to try to make a good movie. You're not the first person to learn how to use a camera or whatever. So what are you like? What's your relationship to it, and how serious are you about it?
Right.
And it's interesting because I think when you're in a position like that, you basically have to listen to the opinions of other people. Like, that was one of the things I really appreciate about your class, is you had us like swap edits and give notes to each other on those edits. And that was like the first time I'd ever really tried to do that. I'd like, if I'm working on something and I'm stuck, I'd send it to my brother, see what he thinks, and I'd get some feedback that way. But like using it as like part of my like role, losing it as like, okay, here's my to-do list today. I'm going to edit this, get this rough cut, send it off to that guy, get notes back from him, implement those notes. Like I never realized the importance of that feedback until I started doing that. And like around the same time, this is kind of an unrelated analogy, but do you guys know the gaming company Valve? They make like tons of Half-Life, like all those games like that. At Valve, Fridays, they take the entire day on Friday and play test through the entire game, whatever they're working on. So it's Half-Life 2. They Friday, play through the entire game, sit on it over the weekend, meet up on Monday, talk about what they thought they're going to play through, and then use Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday to fix those problems, and then play through again on Friday.
I'm into that, because that's honestly that's the way I edit personally. Is I'm editing to make a movie that I can respond to. Because that's to me it's just the clearest gauge. I have a lot harder time in some of the earlier rough stages in seeing things, but as soon as it starts to feel like a movie and I can feel the mood of it, I can like get a sense of if it feels right or it doesn't feel right, and I'm actually responding to it. Because ultimately, like, you're making a movie. If you're making a game, you're making a game. Like, how does it play? How does a movie how does a movie play? How does it like do you feel what you're supposed to be feeling at the right moments? And it's really hard without watching. It's always surprising me how much people like don't watch.
They just trust, like, oh, that making. There, no, it'll be good.
Yeah.
Like,
so how do you make that transition from like you said, you have a hard time with like the beginning stages of editing, right, to where the story starts developing? Like, how do you make that transition from where you're just like kind of throwing things at the timeline, trying to form that story?
Well, for me, I edit in a way that like people always tell you not to, and I always have, and I still like. The only thing that's really allowed me to do it is that I have good output, and so like people allow me to like they put up with me. But for the most part, I'm always trying to edit fine from the beginning, because I like to feel if it's, because it's all a feeling thing. It's like, how does this feel as a movie?
Right.
And I'll usually do like a swatch. Like, for example, on Artful on the show, we have what we call the kicker, right? The first little bit that plays before the commercial, we'll have two artists. It goes back and forth between the two. But when you're doing one segment, you just are focused on your one artist, right? And some people like could see that as like a little bit of a throwaway because so much of it changed. The music changed when the segments get combined, all this kind of stuff. But for me, I've always seen it as a chance to cut the swatch for the rest of the episode. It's like, I'm going to cut like a 1 minute swatch that's going to kind of get at the tone and the emotion of the thing. Like find the right music for that person, find like the right pacing for that person's, and then that ends up being my compass that I use for the rest of the thing. Wow. But when I've worked with it, but it depends on what my latitude is. Like I've worked for filmmakers who are like, you're not going to be doing that, because it does shut other people out of the process in some ways,
right? Yeah.
Because they can't see it while it's being, and I just accommodate, Yeah. I'll just cut in a different way. But for me, my preference is always to like try to be cutting towards the final, and then you get done with that, and you still get 50 notes anyways, right?
Yeah.
Always, so does it require you to undo some of the fine stuff you've done? Yeah, but a lot sticks so too. So, but generally, that's not what, like, that would never be a Hollywood workflow, for example.
Sure,
right.
There's just way too much money and way too many parties involved that want to see things as they go
very specific order and growth and progress.
Totally.
But a lot of it is like throwing things out, having them torn apart. Like, I think one of the reasons I like that assignment where you're all looking at different each other's cuts is because that's my life, at least for the last decade. But yeah, at least for the last decade has been, I wake up, I go outside to my work, what my daughter calls a workhouse. It's a garage.
Nice.
Where I work out in my studio.
Sick.
And I open up Frame.io, and I have notes. That's been my life for the last decade. And so, like, that's a good part of what it means to actually be a professional creative person, is to be receiving notes and know how to receive notes constantly, and to know how to negotiate notes and know how to, like, very rarely, and you do even better work. And what people say is like, I did a cut, I thought it was great. I think it was great. It was really solid. And the showrunner said, "Oh wow, this cut is so good, I can get really picky." And then it was just the same amount of notes, but just more picky notes, And so you're just like, yeah. So you're, I think a lot of times, like, what like I'm happy I've been mostly disabused of over time is the desire to be done. Like, people are always wanting to be done, and it really traps you into doing more mediocre work.
Yeah,
They're not enjoying the process enough. They're just looking for the destination.
Yeah, it's like, dude, like I worked at UVU for a while before I was, like, back in the day. I did graphic design and like video work and stuff like that. And I remember we had like I used to print out programs for, we did like a conference on autism, a conference on addiction, and all these different ones. And I just got done with this big thing, and I dropped it off to the printer, and I was like, wow. He was like, "How you doing?" I was like, "Man, well, I just finished it. Like, I'm finally done." And he was like, "Yeah, well, there'll always be another one." That's somebody that's been in that career for a long time,
right?
He just showed you a picture of Sisyphus holding
just
you.
Yeah. So if you don't fall in love, with some extent with like what it actually, like, the day-to-day entails, either you fall in love with the day-to-day entails, or you become really good at being the person who can get other people to do things for you, right? And you become a generalist, and you know how to get money, and you know how to do all those kind of things and have the vision. But if you're going to be the person who's actually moving clips in a timeline, you have to make peace with the fact that, like, you're not working on feedback to get to a point of having no feedback. You're working on feedback to shape things up to a point where that thing can launch, and then you're continuing on it on the next thing. Like, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, because it's not like I'm like, I'm not some like big Hollywood director or something. Like, I haven't received that kind of like success. I've had success in my own right, but on its own scale, right? But I do have my 10,000 hours, and much more than that. And I think it's a thing that I feel the most like is the most mine. Like I get to keep it regardless, and I don't have to be pretentious. I don't have to fake. I don't have to be like, oh yeah, I know that. Like if I don't know something, I'm just like, oh, I don't know how to do that.
Right.
Because over time, like I've actually put in that work, and I'm not literally living in that myth, and I haven't been for a long time. And the good parts that I understand about doing this professionally are always tied to all the negative parts because I've actually lived it, you know.
Totally.
And so I'll meet young people like who are like talking to me about it, like, yeah, no. I'm like, you're not fooling me. Like, you can you know, until like because you talk to the veterans and everyone's like, oh, it's like a Jaws conversation every time. That Jaws conversation on the boat, it's like, oh yeah, I got this scar and I got this scar, and like you ever like if you ever go freelance with people, it's always like that. Oh, I forgot my tripod plate this time, and I had to duct tape the camera to the thing. And like, you know, I didn't know what the ND filter was when I first started when I was doing Sonographer, and we were filming an interview with a photographer of all people who's been working on light for his whole life, right? And we purchased these lights because we had money and didn't know how to use them, never even learned 3-point lighting, anything like that. We're setting these lights up, we can't figure out, we're like, man, like it's so dark, and like, but yet we're like just blasting this guy with light. And then in the end, the whole thing is not usable anyways. We film a whole interview. It's terrible. It looks terrible. The content was amazing, of course. So it's just like makes you sting, makes it sting that much more. And then the next day we were playing with the camera. We were like, oh, what's this thing? And we're like, ND filter. Turn it off. And we're like, you know. And I think I think there's like those kind of lessons. Like I think I said in class, you know, Nietzsche said that pain is an aid to mnemonics. Like pain will help you remember things really well. Yeah. So if you find yourself in those kind of positions, like, man, I know what an ND filter is now.
100%.
Never forget it.
Yeah. Is there a time, like, as you're going through the editing process and you're getting notes and feedback and everything's going back and forth, right? As the editor, do you get notes and you're just like, I'm gonna ignore that, right? And then because you know the story probably better than the people that.
It's tough for me, especially at this stage in my career, because a lot of the people that give me notes don't have the experience or the or the amount of time that I've put into it. But I try to be a good collaborator, you know. Like I've tried not to ever like feel like I've ever arrived or gotten to a place where I don't need to take notes anymore.
Right.
And I also think one of the basic functions of the editor, like what did Alexander Payne in that doc I had you guys watch says all good editors are sly politicians.
Yeah.
You know, I think that big part of what like there's a lot of other like qualitative aspects to editing that people don't think about. Yeah. For example, you're working on a documentary, it's usually at least like a 9-month to a year edit for a feature. Right. So that means that generally I have directors in my space every single day. You have to be someone that people can be with every day for that long and not like despise you over that time. You know, you have to try things that you don't think are going to work out, but that person wants to see. You have to like understand that ultimately they're the ones that are going to be standing in front of it, and that you're like and also you have to hide yourself in the final product too a little bit, like where you're like, you know, I've had a very, very significant impact on the docs that I've edited, but then you're not the one that's standing in front of it, and so you're like kind of just recede a little bit and let people as part of the trade-off. So yeah, I think for me a lot of it is like negotiating similar types of like social things that you would in other areas. Like, how do you be a good friend? How do you like, you know, you like listen, you actually like you're pliable, you're not inflexible. Like I think working with I think it's hard because you want an editor, from my perspective, you want an editor that has an opinion.
Yeah.
And you want an editor that has vision, and you want them to have courage to create from that vision. Yeah. But you also need somebody that will change it if you tell them you hate it.
Yeah,
totally. You know? And I've had people say that to me, you know, like, oh, I love that. I like just straight up saying like, I hate that, you know, not even being kind about it.
I hate that. The bush at all.
Yeah, I hate that. I hate that. And I say, okay, well, this is what I was attempting to do. This is what my vision was for it. This is why I made that decision. Do you think that worked? No. okay, why didn't it work? Is the whole idea bad, or is the way that I approached it bad? So it's like learning how to have conversations with people to clear up communication so that you can get to. It's like I was just saying to someone recently, like it's like going to an interior decorator and an interior decorator coming to you and you're saying, okay, I want you to design my family room. And they're like, okay, how do you want it? And you're like, pretty. Right?
Super pretty.
And they're like, okay, do you like modern art? Do you like modern furniture? Do you like vintage furniture? Do you like, you know, like, do you like wicker? Like, you know,
but what is pretty?
Like, what is it? Yeah. What is your definition of pretty? And a lot of what that communication becomes is like a conversation around swatches. So if someone says, I didn't like your music that you chose, you say, oh, can you make me a playlist? It doesn't even need to be playlist of soundtrack music. Just make me a playlist of music that you like. Yeah. Oh, you don't like my poster design? Can you go on can you make a Pinterest board of like all the different poster design that you like? And then you at least have a conversation piece. And I think part of it as an editor, your role is actually getting things to the place of becoming conversation pieces so that they can be discussed. So you're like, okay, I have to have the courage to be the first one to actually put the thing together so that we can tear it apart,
right?
And then have enough, be teachable enough that when that happens that you can have those conversations. And you know, once in a while, like I've very rarely had to be like, no, I won't do that. Like I've never, that hasn't really been how it ends up being. What it ends up being usually is like a long process of communication that you end up at some kind of compromise. Okay. Cool. And you say, hey, this is you hired me to do this. You hired me because you trust my opinion and because you like the things that you've seen that I've done. And from my perspective, this is what I would do if it was just me. That's why I'll say that to people a lot. If I was a director, this is what I would do. And that's what I've done here, is what I would do if I was the one that was directing it, because you want someone to like have enough vision to create something for you to respond to, even if it's something that you don't like, so that you can see something outside of you and then you're no longer just in the abstract realm of ideas. Where it's just like, oh, I think it, because then you're like, because you're talking about, a lot of times you're talking about very different things. You're talking about pretty, and you know, that person's picturing Crate and Barrel, and the other person's picturing, you know, antique store or whatever. And until you actually have something that you can like pick apart together, you don't have something that's material that you're able to like usher into whatever it needs to end up being.
That's cool.
I've definitely had an experience like that where like I was a DP and I had a director. And ahead of time, we'd really talked that we wanted kind of like a Guy Ritchie, very like snap, very fast, very witty style project. And I think we maybe did not communicate that intentions all the way down to our editor. Because our editor was very much a doc guy.
So like
and so
slow,
what we got back was
Tarkovsky.
Yeah, 100%. What we got was a lot slower, a lot more drawn out. Yeah. We're like, buddy, it's not exactly the tone that we're going for here. And so coming to a compromise where he didn't feel like he was getting subtracted from it, right? What he brought to the table was valuable. It's just a little bit different than what we need. And so finding that middle ground that where basically everyone's vision can be included, like being a good collaborator is definitely like super important.
Yeah, so like a lot of, like, I think it depends. Like you don't have to be a good collaborator. I don't know if I believe that. I was going to say you don't have to be a good collaborator to be a good editor. I do think that in any kind of craft, like you can be really skillful at it and be an asshole. Right? However, I found it very helpful for my career personally to be likable and to be like nice to be around, especially where people are in my space all the time
for that much time,
and like that much concentrated time, and like where you want your voice to be expressed in the thing too, and you're fighting an uphill battle if you're going to be inflexible all the time. To me, that's not the way to do it, especially given that person has to stand in front of the thing. They're the ones that have to go promote it. They're the ones that have to do the Q&A. They're the ones whose name is on the director. So ultimately, like if I'm directing, I want that. So why would I not give them that same kind of
That's cool.
flexibility?
It's totally different on narrative film sets. You know, everybody can be an asshole to everybody, and for some reason they still get hired. So.
And things like that. I think that's true in a lot of professional things. You know, it's just like, is that what I want my life to be? Not really,
for sure.
You know, like
sure.
I and also like I've very rarely met someone who is big enough, who was talented enough for me to like not really care that they were an asshole.
Yeah.
You know, unless it was an opportunity that was being given to me, and then I like knew that I was like negotiating their
additional cost that goes with
assholery
it.
with
Yeah.
my desire to like move forward in my career. You know, but,
For sure.
Gotta balance your options there.
like, yeah, but if you're gonna be like that, man, you better like I'm all about. I'm a big fan of people supporting themselves. I'm a big fan of confidence. I'm a big fan of people even bragging if they want. I don't care. It's never bothered me. I think that's like, I think a lot of times people's allergicness to that is a product of white culture, right? And white etiquette. But I also believe that if you talk like Muhammad Ali, then you got to knock people out.
Yeah.
So if you want to, if you have that talent and you have that confidence and you can keep creating that output and create those things, and like, more power to you. Yeah. Maybe I need to be more assertive, but for me, that's just not really that's not really my style.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. So just to get funny real minute, for a minute at least, Avid, Premiere, Resolved.
Great.
Oh yeah,
Final
Resolve.
Cut?
I forgot you're a Resolve guy.
No, I'm a Premiere guy. He's
Oh,
a
you're
Resolve guy.
Oh, you're Resolve. Oh, okay.
So I was like, what is
That's
that?
He's a
That's right.
Resolve guy.
That's right. You mean what do I work in?
Yeah.
Premiere. Yeah.
Cool.
I started in Final Cut 7.
Yeah. Like everybody.
And I
the
actually edited a documentary called Dying in Vain about heroin abuse.
Cool.
And
That's such a good Dying in Vain. Oh my
yeah,
gosh, that name.
and then we got to the point of bringing it to a finishing studio, and they were all in Premiere, and so I was forced. And then we unlocked it, which happens all the time in docs. This is Jenny's movie, by the way.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so Jenny McKenzie, another local documentary filmmaker and teacher at UVU, but we unlocked it because we saw some things that needed to change in it, and then that meant that we needed to edit it again, but everything had been ported over to Premiere, and that's how I had to learn Premiere.
You're like, we're in this now.
So I learned Premiere. I wish I knew Avid. I've lost some gigs from it, from being honest, that I didn't know how to use that and use it. And then I use Resolve for color correction.
Yeah. Cool.
I should ask you a question about color, because I remember one of the things you taught us in the class is that, like, if you can help it, it's way better if your editor is not on set at all, because that way they don't have a bias of what happened on set.
Right.
Likewise, if you are editing something, do you feel like you have a bias when you go and color it, or do you like to have that layer of separation where you're like, I'll color something else, and like, you know what I mean? Does that, like, do you have?
I think I probably am biased at that point, but I
yeah.
also like it's like an extension of what I understand the vision of the thing to be at that point.
Sure.
And so a lot of it is like would it be better to bring another colorist on? Maybe. But I think for the most part, but I'm also not doing like really crazy grading, and like usually there's not like a very specific look in that way. It's more people want more naturalistic. They want like,
especially for docs, like
it's
that.
a lot of dialing in and fixing mistakes, fixing
sense.
mixed light is like one of the
yeah.
biggest things, like actually drawing power windows over everything separately and color correcting them all separately and learning how to do all that kind of stuff. But
It's about color matching more than look creating,
color,
basically.
Usually, at least, I mean, I don't think that's true of like professional colorists, but for the level of stuff that I was doing, like I taught myself how to color because I found out that you could get a free Linda subscription through the Salt Lake Library if you had a library card, and so I went through all the certifications, and I just taught myself how to do it, and I like picked it up as another thing I could throw in the package for people, you know.
That's cool.
But yeah, so
That's awesome, man. You've had quite a experience in your own career growing up. I feel like it's all been formed by your own desire to experiment and try things. It hasn't really been led by anybody specifically pushing you towards anything.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I think that's true. I've always been like a real like we sold like 1,000 copies of our first CD as a hip hop group when I was 16, like out of the back of the trunk kind of thing.
That's
like handing it, like, you know, like
Signing
making like
This will be worth something one day.
I've always kind of been that guy, and I've always felt like I've always felt like my labor was cheap. I know I can work hard. I grew up. I had my first job when I was 12, mowing baseball, doing baseball diamond maintenance, and like worked in restaurants and service and construction and all this kind of stuff. So it's like I know I know that if the thing that's between me and finishing something is my labor, I'm good to go. I'll put the labor in to make it work and make it happen.
Totally respect that.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's always kind of been that way. It's like, well, I want to do this thing. Like, it's also an Achilles heel a little bit, because I think that a lot of times I should have brought other people in, and I should have done some of the challenging work of communicating vision and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, in terms of actually finishing things, if you want to get, like, any documentary filmmakers out there who are directing, if you're having a hard time finishing your movie, bring it to me, we'll finish it. Like, that's one thing I know I'll do.
Because you crossed that finish line.
I've crossed that finish line so many times. I'm not afraid of it. Like, I can finish things, and I'm not afraid of something not. Like, I believe in our ability to, as collaborators, to maximize whatever the thing is, and to make it as good as possible, and to move on. Like, you move on, and you, like, someone was asking me just yesterday, how do you feel about Sonographer? Like, when you watch it now, are you embarrassed by it? Do you, like, feel like, oh, that's a student film? I said, no, I think it's great. And not because I think it's like the best movie in the world, but because, like, when you've made 20 ceramic pots that have all these different utilities, and you're like, it gets to a point where you're like, oh yeah, I guess I do kind of like the handle on that one a little bit better, or I do like the shape of that one a little bit more. But actually, that one, like, even though it's kind of funky looking, I like that I did that little thing or whatever it is. Like, it's much more utilitarian at that point, because you've put the work in, and you've like, I would tell you guys in class, like, if you finish something, it's an artifact. If you don't, it becomes a skeleton in your closet. Like, and it's always become something that you talk about, the big thing that you want. Like, you want to talk to, like, a bunch of MBA hopefuls, like, just like smoke weed with, like, in a circle with some people, and they'll be like, oh, I was gonna, and then my knee got hurt, and like, oh, I was gonna do this, and I got that. Oh, I was gonna do it. And the same thing is true with artists. It's like, oh, I was gonna do this. I have this great novel in me, and it's like, maybe, but you actually don't until we don't know that until it's communicated,
right?
And if your goal is just for it to be like a monastic, you're just like a monk who's doing it for your own development, cool.
Yeah. Right.
But if you want to share it with other people, then that thing doesn't actually exist until you bring it outside of your creative space, and you have to get to a place where you're no longer living in the mythology. It's like being in a relationship. Like, you're no longer in a crush with art, or you're no longer in a crush with filmmaking, but you're actually in love with it. And being in love with it means, like, having awkward conversations and figuring out fairness and how to, like, be considerate and do the hard thing in those relationships. Yeah. And I think the same thing is true in any kind of craft. Like, what's your devotion to it? And, like, how do we know, like, if your goal is to have an audience, how does the audience know if you're not putting stuff out? Otherwise, it's just, then that really is pretense. That really is pretentiousness, because it's you're pretending to have a gift that you can't show, You're like, oh, I can't. Like, all right, bring it out. Let's see it.
You're assuming all the valor of this thing you haven't done yet.
Yeah, you want, like, you're dressing like it, you're doing all the things, and it's like, and that's cool. But it is different in nature than somebody who has a bunch of artifacts to look back on. And now I can look back on stuff I've made like 15 years ago, and I'm like, I kind of like it, actually, because like, are they on this third and looking this way on an interview, and, like, looking off camera, you can't even see their eye, or it's like we shot a good portion of Sonographer in the wrong frame rate. We somehow bumped from 24p to 29, right? Gosh. Yeah, we did do that. And do I wish we hadn't? Yeah, I do. But can I appreciate it now when I look back at it as, like, one of my early pots, It's like, yeah, I can, and I appreciate it on that level. And not only that, but there's so much in it that I can see that is some of the best creative work I've done. Because you have beginner's mind, you don't know what you're doing yet, and so you're doing some of the most creative work.
Not afraid to break the rules.
Not afraid to break the rules, and you just don't. You're still under the illusion that you're, like, I don't know. You're under a very, like, healthy, I don't know about healthy, but very helpful illusion of what it means to do this as a career.
Yeah.
And yeah, as long as I can get you into the door and get you into the process to keep doing it and keep creating artifacts, like, those other things, I believe, will come if you're serious about it. You'll learn how to, like, white balance, and you'll learn how to frame interviews. You'll learn how to light. You'll learn how to like do like with documentary stuff. You'll learn how to not get as much rustle on the mic and all that kind of stuff over time. That kind of stuff can be taught, and especially if you have good mentors. But you have to show up. You have to be in that. Yeah, what was it? Picasso who said that like inspiration will come, but it has to find you working.
Well said. Yeah. Well said. And that ties great back to what you're saying. Like the gap between me and my goals is my work and my work ethic and how much I do that. I feel like that's so pivotal when it comes to editing too. Yeah. Because I think one of the things I heard you say was that like most student edits are edited to a rough cut. They're like, cool, it's a string out. There it is, and then they'll cut it. Like they're done. Like no. You just barely laid down the work at all. You built up the marble. Now you got to cut it out from that marble. Like it's so much.
And you're very rarely editing. You're very rarely editing something that is going to like where you're the only final invested party.
Yeah, totally.
Usually
it's not just
you
up to you.
Showrunners. You have people from network. You have like I did a doc called. I Want My MTV about the history of the formation of MTV, and we had A&E, and A&E was saying, make it more salacious. We want to know more about sex and parties and this and that. I do stuff for BYU, and they're like, we need to hear about Jesus more, or like whatever it is. Like,
a little bit.
There's always going to be a variation. There's always a variation of that thing of like people who have interests, and they have different interests than you that want something, and like. You have to at some point learn how to negotiate those things and be like, well, how do I get my vision across while realizing that these are the people who gave me the money or whatever it is.
Totally.
You said you did philosophy?
Yeah.
Makes sense. This has been probably the deepest podcast we've had.
I tend to do that.
No, it's great.
I like class because, like I said, I've always thought about editing as cuts and moving that together and copy and paste this and duplicate that layer. And then like taking someone that's like, think about it. Use the philosophy approach to how you're making the story. Like to me, that was
Well,
it's a big
I remember
thing.
I was told before I taught the editing class that a lot of the students in it weren't going to be editors. Right, that they had to take it as a requirement.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, like it's easy to be in that kind of class and be like, well, this doesn't really apply to me. Then I'm just going to slog my way through it.
Yep.
But those lessons, like the critical thinking, is how I really make my money.
Yeah.
I don't
like. Yeah. I do have technical know-how. Like I'm the guy that people call if they have an editing question a lot of times about technical stuff too. But that's not where I make my money. Like I have made my money over time through my brain and through storytelling and through like trying to figure out how to make things last, like how to make things more meaningful.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, shoot, man, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
We're out of time. We'd love to have you back again.
Let's do it.
Cool.
And then real quick, do you have a shout out you want to do for like social if you want people to get a hold of you? Or
Oh yeah, I'm easy to find. It's my name. I'm on Instagram, Torben Bernhard.
Cool.
I have a company, Oho Media, and you can check out if you Google me, you'll find my movies.
Cool. Sounds good. So you guys heard it. Hit them up if you need them for any documentary needs. And thanks so much for being on the show, man.
Thanks for coming,
Appreciate
Torben.
it.
Cool.
And thanks to you guys for watching. So we'll see you around next time, okay?
Bye.
See
Bye,
ya.
everyone.